Grow Great is a city government leadership podcast with Lisa Norris and me, Randy Cantrell. Each week we share insights, experiences, and wisdom to help you and your leadership grow great. Our website is growgreat.com. You'll either make a way or an excuse. So Lisa and I we have a lot of off-the-air conversations. We keep threatening to record those because some of those are, I don't know. I think
they're entertaining at best. Yeah. At least.
We're entertained, and we happen to think if we're entertained, then you probably would be too.
True.
Well, it started with, if only we fought just as hard to understand as we do to disagree. And so as she and I were discussing this and trying to bring some value to you when it comes to city government leadership, and we were sharing some stories, and it kind of morphed from that. And admittedly, it does seem harder to understand as it does to disagree. And certainly we're in today's political climate, we're seeing that ad nauseum. But the conversations that we had really boiled down to a person's ability to kind of see what we see as leaders. And so we were sharing some stories, and we'll share a few with you guys of times where we saw what we needed, we saw what we wanted, we thought we were being clear. Turns out, in many cases, we were being clear, but we just can't get what we need. We can't get what we asked for. And so I called an audible, as I am wont to do, and I said, listen, it boils down to, you will make a way or an excuse. You'll find a way to succeed, or you'll just continue to find excuse after excuse after excuse of why you can't get something done. As leaders, what do we do with that? Now, let me paint some context, and then we'll kind of open this up, Lisa. It depends on where people are. We have a brand new hire. Let's assume that we've done a great job. We've onboarded this person, and there's this learning curve. There's just a learning curve. And we just can't quite get what we need, but that's the context. As opposed to somebody who's maybe been on the job for a long period of time, maybe they have a past history of doing a pretty good job, maybe even a great job, maybe not. That's going to be different. Mm-hmm. So Lisa and I are not going to be able to paint. We're not going to be able to paint with a real fine brush every single context. You guys are smart enough to figure that out. It does seem to me, Lisa, that people seem to be bent toward solving something, fixing something, owning something, taking responsibility for something, and then other people seem to be bent toward always finding a reason why it didn't go well, why I couldn't give you what you asked for. And I think it does play into the thing that we thought we were going to talk about. If only we fought just as hard to understand as we do to disagree, I would twist that. It's really the same principle. Can we fight hard to accept responsibility and to move on and figure something out? Mm-hmm. Some of the creativity that I have heard over the course of my career with the excuses, I just think, man, if this person would have put that much effort and energy into just doing the thing to begin with and doing it right, man, the world would be our oyster,
It's so interesting because to me, I found little gray between those two. You're either hell-bent on fixing something and getting it done and doing it efficiently and right and well, or you provide, I don't see a gray, or you provide the excuses. I mean, do you ever see a gray where sometimes they provide an excuse and sometimes they're accountable? It is like this clear line that you're either this side or this side, right? You're either the excuse maker or you're the accountable party that owns it and moves forward with finding a solution.
I think
I've found no gray in those two.
And I don't necessarily disagree, although I will say I do think as leaders, and this is, I think, where hopefully we can all learn something. I certainly have. I think our leadership matters in the culture that we build and the culture that we tolerate.
Right.
I have had staff meetings with people who might not be excuse makers, but they weren't going to be real quick to own it. They would own it partially, and then there would always be that conjunction, but.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to learn, frankly, the hard way. Some people, that's not an excuse. They really want you to understand. They really want you to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
Because when I was a young leader, that smelled of excuse making to me. Because I'm like you've just described. If there's something and I failed, I'm owning it. Lock, stock, and smoke and barrel. I've just never found.
And probably done your whole life, right?
I have.
Yeah, me too.
I just have not found a downside to doing that. And so I would read that in this other person and think, okay, I liked everything up to the point where they said, but, and then they went on and they had some explanation for why it took longer or whatever. So I have found some people, after having a lot of one-on-one conversations with these people, and not often, I agree with you most of the time, but I have found that there are some people that they just really want you to see their perspective and understand their point of view. And it really wasn't excuse making. It was just, they just wanted you to understand why maybe it failed. Happy to own the failure, but there was a reason for it. It wasn't like I was just this colossal idiot, which I was never going to call anybody that anyway.
Well,
But
and
I
I've
think
seen that.
I think it speaks to our role as leaders. Okay, what are we going to tolerate? You have said repeatedly, and it's true, that lowest level of performance, that lowest behavior that we're willing to tolerate is going to really set the tone for us. And I think it's certainly true with this topic.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have seen a similar when you talked about somebody owning the mistake, but there's a but in there somewhere. And when I've experienced that most of the time that I can think of examples, it is people new enroll. It is people that know there was a failure, that they need more information. They're like, yeah, we definitely didn't do that well, but they don't know what caused it. They don't know if it's all us or them. And I also never see them shift blame to somebody else. But I need to really, I'll hear, yes, that is HR's, whatever. Yes, that is CMO's, whatever. Yes, that's IT's, whatever. But I need to go explore it because I don't know what caused that. I don't know if it's a system failure. I don't know if it was I don't know if we just had a gap in knowledge and it was somebody new. So that's when I see the buts typically on there is they don't have all the information they need to fully inform you. And they also don't want to misinform, which is important. It's also accountability. Right. They aren't going to throw something under the bus or somebody under the bus. They're going to try to get to the bottom of it and give you better facts, not guess on the facts, because that's also a trait on the excuse making side. When I see the excuse making side, typically what goes hand in hand with that is throwing people under the bus so that it shifts blame from you.
Pretty much always.
Yeah, it's somebody else's fault. There's a reason that it happened because they're going to put something in front of it so it's not their failure. It's some other thing that caused their failure. But they never own it as their own, and therefore behavior, I've never seen it shift. If they make excuses, they never own it, nor do they change the behavior. They always default to it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't my team. The customer didn't understand. It's the customer's issue. That's what frustrates me, because when you're talking to them, trying to get them, you almost put yourself on the end. I'm trying to understand and not disagree, but there's always this front. If that's always the approach you get, you naturally put up a wall of suspicion going, now I don't know how much they're telling me accurately and factually. And I question 15 times heavier than I would to a high performer that owns it. If a high performer owns it, my typical response is, no, it sounds great. Can you figure out more and let me know as soon as you have more information? And they will always come back and go, you know what? that was our team. Totally, we totally missed it. We just had a brain fart and told somebody wrong, and we've already called them. I mean, they'll automatically tell me everything they've done to solve for that, so that it doesn't happen again. Excuse makers, no.
How
excuse
impactful
makers
in your career? How impactful do you think it is in your leadership, the fact that you've been able to stand in front of your team and own something that was your responsibility? How do you think that plays into it? To help facilitate your team to kind of, hey, man, the boss, she stands up and she owns it, so we can follow suit. We feel safe to follow suit too.
Well, it plays substantially into psychological safety of the team, because if you're willing to make a mistake and clarify it was your mistake, secondly, and have them work through it and they can see there's no judgment being placed on it, it's huge in confidence building for the team. That, because I've always been of the belief system that it's okay to make mistakes. What I don't want to see is repeated mistakes. If you're continuing to make the same mistake over and over, then you aren't learning from it, nor are you listening or trying to create pathways to not have that occur again. But when it's just here we failed on this, typically my response, and I get in front of the team, is go, okay, we had this issue. This is what I understand. Anything that I've missed, I'll ask the team, is there anything that I've missed? No, you haven't missed anything. Then let's go solve for this. And what I'm looking for is X, Y, and Z. And at the end of the day, I want the issue first addressed and corrected for whoever's impacted. Secondly, what's the process we need to fix so it doesn't occur again? And let's present that to the group and make sure there's a documented kind of something in place so we all know where to find that next time, so we all know, and that there's more than one of us that know, right? Yeah. I never like a one person doing it. Right. It's a team, so that we all know where to find that next time. So for me, that's always created a very safe space for team members to solve for those things and to bring them forward when they make a mistake.
And how does accountability?
That's what counts.
And how does accountability play into this? Because sometimes it may not be so much a mistake as it may be a failure. It may be an incomplete assignment. It may be, I asked for it. I mean, I'm thinking of so many situations where I told people this is how I need to receive this information. Very early on in my career, I came up with a report, because in my one-on-one meetings, I really needed. The world was moving fast. Today's world moves even faster. And I needed my go-to list from each of my direct reports. What is it you most need from me? Mm-hmm. Now what's next? And now what's next? And go down about 3 levels and no more of the things that now that becomes my to-do list for you. Well, I use that to hold myself accountable, but it's certainly possible as a human that I could, from one week to another, I could have done 1 and 2, but I omitted number 3. Mm-hmm. And so now in that one-on-one meeting, I might say, I owe you an apology. I didn't get to that 3rd item, and I hope I didn't slow you down too terribly much. I'm gonna jump on that. How does that play, do you think, in leadership? Because so many times it's not just failure, it's tantamount to, in school, an incomplete assignment or an assignment where you didn't follow the directions. It's those kinds of things that I hear constantly from clients, that we're frustrated with team members, that we told you, we laid it out, kind of like my list of 3 things, but okay, I didn't get that 3rd thing done. Well, that's on me.
Well, there's kind of 2 things at play here. For me, there's let's talk about the first part. If you're asking the accountability piece, if you're asking for it to your demonstration, you have told them, you've given them examples, I think is the way you phrased it. You wrote it out for them. Yeah. And I've had this experience before where you think you're clear multiple times in multiple conversations. At the point they don't get you back what you need, and it's crystal clear. I always say crystal clear in my mind. I've done everything I can do to not only tell you, but to show you and to demonstrate it. and then give you an example of it if they're still not getting it. If I've done all those things and you still come back with something that isn't what you need, when I've had those situations, at that point, I just stop the conversation, because you're either unwilling, uninterested, or disengaged from even hearing what I'm asking for. You're not choosing to listen. You're choosing to the point to disagree. You're standing so firm in what you believe you want to provide that you're not hearing the customer and what they need from you to provide. Or you're not asking the questions of, hey, I can't get this. Can you tell me why you're needing it? And to help them understand. So on the accountability front in that scenario, that's frustrating to me, where that becomes an unwillingness. You're so digging in your heels that you're not listening to the needs that I'm asking for and have communicated. And in conversations like that, for me, I typically get pretty direct in those and say, okay, stop. What did I ask for? Tell me what I've asked for, to make sure that they understand the ask, and they'll repeat it to me. And I'm straightforward and I'm kind, but I'm very clear, and they can typically tell that, and they'll repeat it, and I'll go, no, not what I asked for. What I've asked for is this. Can you get that? Yes or no? Why not? Why? It's usually to the point of disagreeing. When I've experienced that, it's always why they can't. It is always why they can't. I can't get it because I can't. Making. That's correct. So from the accountability front, those I handle much more directly from a leadership standpoint, and it becomes clear. And then I'm certainly more watchful of it moving down the path, because if that continues to happen, then as a leader, we must address that. You cannot let that keep going on, because in those cases, I've found that is a pattern. It's not a one-time. It is a constant pattern. And I have to get, I've even had the opportunity where I've had to tell people, get out of your technical brain, stop thinking technical, listen to what I'm asking for. Because if your customers are experiencing what I'm experiencing today, they're going to be frustrated if they're not already. And usually I know that the customers are frustrated because they've called me. So I'm trying to help coach them without throwing anybody else under the bus. Right. And so that's to that point. To the point of, I think your second example was kind of, do they just not understand? Are they unclear? And if it's a knowledge gap, you can figure that out quickly by asking more questions. And I've had that situation occur too, where they're like, okay, this is what I understood you to ask. And the ask is right, but they're not getting it to you. Or the third, I can't get to the third one. Can you tell me why you couldn't get to it? Because that's pretty important. Well, if you recall, and they know, I remember we had this issue come up with the mayor that it took me 2 days to work on. And then I had to, an applicant, we had to dive into that. And you asked me to go fix that computer problem or whatever the case is. They'll usually tell you, and they're like, but I'm going to be able to get it to you by Tuesday. Would Tuesday work? And I'll have my list for next week as well. I mean, it's no longer excuse making. They can tell you the why. And then they can also say, are those usually your high performers? These are my priorities. Does that match what you're looking for? Like when I've met with Cheryl before, I'm like, Cheryl, here's the things I didn't get to, but here's what I've worked on that kind of came up and I felt was higher priority. Anything I didn't get to you that you need right now? So it's those kind of conversations that make a clear difference between high performers and understanding what's in front of them, and the low performers and the excuse making. It's understanding versus.
But you've never had. I'm gonna go out on a really safe limb and say you've never had an excuse maker who spoke that way with you. You've never had. I've never had an excuse maker who said, "Listen, I'm not going to be able to do that, and here's why. But here's what I can do." I've never ever heard that kind of lingo from an excuse maker. It's just can't and why I can't. And to your point, it tends to be blame game. I'm going to put the burden on leaders because we're in charge of culture. And it isn't to say that other people aren't also impactful to culture, but only to the degree that we allow it. Only to the degree that if we are a leader and we're not a boss, our influence. Coworkers can absolutely influence one another and change the culture. And it's a reason that Lisa and I have had some episodes, and I'm sure we'll keep talking about it in the future. That toxic, which is the word I hear all the time, that toxic employee, even the employee whose their own work product may be superior, but the toxicity of their presence on the team and the impact, the negative impact they have on the team is so detrimental. The team can either tolerate that or not. Now, I just happen to have a viewpoint that as a leader, I don't want to put the burden on the team to self-correct that, to self-police that. And so I think that's why this excuse maker in our culture can be just such a culture buster. If as leaders, we tolerate that, we don't continue to pressure test that and put pressure on that to conform to what we need, it's just a lost cause. It's just a lost cause.
Yeah, it is so interesting because the excuse makers are the most frustrating for me, most frustrating teammates to have to manage.
Why?
Because what I have always found is the excuse making is so prevalent that I cannot get them to change the behavior because they don't believe it to be true.
There's no growth.
You can't. I have not been able to grow them. Now, will they say they're trying? Will they say they're trying to put the effort in, that they're on board? I mean, I always get that. No, I'm all in. I'm on board. But I can't actually get them to change behaviors because they don't believe it to be true. And you may see a shift for a very short period of time, but the default, they have been doing that their whole life. I have never found them not to go back to that default when under pressure or when there's a problem in front of them that they cannot solve. They always go back to the negative behavior and the excuse making. In fact, I think we've talked about this before. They usually start with, well, you know why we can't do that, because why the customer's wrong, right? I mean, it's that kind of like this simpleton, like Lisa, why it's the customer, that person, or, well, we can't do that because the system doesn't do that. My belief system for the audience, I think everything is figure outable. It may not be the perfect solution to what you need. But I believe the answer, if I don't know something and my boss is saying, can we do this? I'm like, you know what? Let me go think about that for a minute. And I just need to think about it, but I feel confident we can figure out something. That's how I always leave it, because I believe you can always figure out something
to build a high
if you want to.
Yeah. To build a high performing team, should leaders devote how much effort, if any, should leaders devote to trying to convert that person?
Well, they shouldn't convert much effort. I mean, they shouldn't put forth and invest in much effort, but we do. I've been guilty of it. You've had to coach me through that early on. We put the effort because you're so, forgive my language, you're so hell-bent on trying to help them become better parts of the team. But my lifelong journey in leadership has proven to me over time, to most recent day, you aren't going to convert them. You're just not going to convert them. You can try to get them to be part of the team. You can try to get them to do their best, because we all have reasons we can or are delayed from acting in a manner we might want to do. There's, you have to get collaboration. All of us do. With the leadership team has to agree. So we know there's always hurdles in any employment decision that may be impacting us for whatever reason. We've all got them, but you're not going to convert them. You may change one aspect, but that genuine behavior of resistance and unwillingness and throwing people under the bus, I have not ever seen that change, Randy. I'm curious. You're 10 years my senior and you were CEO. Have you ever seen it? Have you ever seen a change?
No. And,
okay.
But I made up my mind as and just last week, Lisa and I did a recording. If you haven't gone back and go back and listen to, it was an episode about misplaced empathy. And I'm certainly empathetic, but I'm very discriminating. I'm very selective about it. The person that you've been describing is a person that, here's how my empathy is going to manifest itself with such a person. Time to move on. To quote Tom Petty, it's time to get going. What lies ahead, I have no way of knowing, but I know this: you're not going to be on my team. Mm-hmm. So go get on another team. Do I think that kind of behavior is likely to foster success for that person? No, but it's their life, and I completely respect their ability to decide for themselves how they want to live their life. I completely respect their ability to determine their worldview, and I think you hit it. I think you hit it on the head. If their worldview is this isn't solvable, we can't do it. It's that age-old adage: whether you think you can or whether you think you can, either way, you're right. Mm. And my experience is high-performing cultures, high-performing organizations are led by people who have a can-do attitude, who believe they can, who believe it can be done.
Well, and the challenge in that line of thinking is that impact to the team when you retain those that can't. That's the problem. At some point, because they typically those individuals that are resistant, that create excuses, that throw their team under the bus, they continue to do that with the customers, especially if you haven't been able to help them move on to somewhere else. The wake they leave behind and the frustration will eventually impact your team. Doesn't matter if if it's a crew in the maintenance world, doesn't matter if it's a team like a department, and it doesn't matter if it's an executive team member. If they are impacting the customers, you will start losing great ones, because it's the whole thing. You're tolerating. A leadership is defined by the worst behavior they're willing to tolerate. And if you're tolerating that, why on earth would the high performers want to keep performing high? They're going to do it, but they're going to be frustrated, and they're going to start separating themselves, and you lose camaraderie, you lose collaboration, you lose innovation, because all of those things, they're no longer going to investigate with that individual because it's proven not to be successful, and they aren't going to waste their time on it either. So you're slowly breaking down whatever team they are a part of. You're slowly breaking it down, and the collective group is impacted negatively far beyond what you can see with the naked eye, far beyond what you can see. And you won't hear about it till they're gone. It rises up every time through the ashes of all the damage left.
Then you'll hear way more than you ever thought you would hear.
That's
after
right.
the fact.
That's right.
You know, my conclusion about it, a few things, and we've mentioned this before: 2 ways to have the tallest building in town: build the tallest building or burn everybody else's down. Excuse makers seem to be the latter group. Personally, as a leader, I got no tolerance for the latter. Mm-hmm. The quote, "You'll either make a way or an excuse," you just find a way. I studied when I was a younger man, more than I do now, some of the titans of industry. And I studied a man, Harold Geneen. Harold Geneen was the leader behind ITT. ITT was really the first conglomerate in the world, and was just a tyrannical leader, but a really fanatical accountant kind of a mind, and was known for reducing top-level leadership to tears, grown men. And this is back in the, I'm assuming back in the, don't quote me on this, 40s, 50s. I mean, we're going way, way back in American history. But he had a quote that I always loved. It was just super simple. And the quote was, "Managers must manage." Translation, just, you got to find a way. Other translation, the phrase that I keyed in on as a leader was "no excuses." Just no excuses. And that was so important. I had signs. It was, no excuses was just a big deal, because I learned very early on how frustrated that made me, just as it makes you, with people who wanted to offer a million reasons why it couldn't be done, when I'm just looking for the one reason why it can be done or how it can be done. And so I think part of it for me as a leader is, what do you want? Mm-hmm. What do you want? By and large, I have found that as leaders, it's in any capacity, city government or private sector or anything else. But for you folks in city government, which is, you're our people, we're going to get mostly what we deserve. We are going to get mostly what we tolerate. We're going to get what we foster. We're going to get what we reward. We're going to get what we accept and what we put up with, or we can shift it and we can figure out a way to not make excuses and to make a way. And I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, no, I agree. I know many people may not see it or necessarily agree with it, but I have learned over time, and especially you brought great clarity to it over the last several years as well, in a different way, that it's not serving your team, it's not serving you as a leader, it's not serving your organization, and it's certainly not serving the team members to retain an excuse maker as somebody that's not accountable. They are doing far more damage in the background than you realize. And you have to, in order to serve them well, sometimes, like you and I have talked about, you can be kind but firm, is helping them find somewhere else where they can be happy, right? That does mean losing their job here if you have to make it. But I've always tried to tell, those individuals, I'm super honest, because I get much more direct when I put in the effort and you're not changing, to help them get off the bus. But I try to do it first with you making the choice. And I'll have that conversation. I'll sit down with them and say, listen, it's not working here. What I need is this. It's just not a good fit. What you're providing and what I need are two different things. And I believe you're trying, but I've had that conversation probably 30 times over my 27 years, with employees of all, not just in my department, all over, that come to me for advice. And I said, find somewhere that makes you happy, and this isn't it. And you need to go somewhere that makes you happy. And typically what I'll tell them, don't make us make that decision. We'll make it. But why would you want us to make it? How does that help you in us making that decision and it going in your file? Find somewhere that makes you happy, and we'll help you transition. But this isn't it, So for me, I would encourage the listeners dealing with this. You just got to deal with it. You can be kind and firm, help them get off the bus, or take them off the bus. It's by force or by will, right? And hopefully the other person will choose it and you don't have to, but don't let it linger, because the damage they're leaving in their wake is far beyond what you recognize.
Thanks for watching and listening to Grow Great, a city government leadership podcast. For Lisa Norris, I'm Randy Cantrell. Be well, do good, grow great. The website is growgreat.com.